Live from Berlin, Connecticut. Good afternoon and welcome to today's program and webinar, part of the highly acclaimed series of webinars that ACP, the Association of Contingency Planners, presents for both current and future members. For more information about ACP, please visit www.acp-international.com. My name is Ed Goldberg, and in addition to my role with the Connecticut Chapter, I serve as Corporate ACP's Education Committee Chair. My thanks to Gianna and ACP's headquarters staff at ADG in Albany, and my good friend Fred Rogers at Continuity Housing for their roles as webinar experts who work behind the scenes to ensure that these webinars happen flawlessly. And a big thanks to our webinar series sponsor, Continuity Housing. Continuity Housing guarantees pre-negotiated hotel rooms at substantial savings for the critical employees of larger and mid-sized companies in order to help prevent a business disruption in the event of a crisis. They've created a patent-pending guaranteed employee housing program which secures and protects hotel rooms for critical personnel and their families if needed while saving companies significant expense. Continuity Housing has a 100% success record with their deployments, and each member of their team has at least 10 years of experience. For information on receiving a free 30-minute consultation about your deployment housing needs, visit continuityhousing.com or leave a comment in the survey that will pop up at the end of the webinar. At this time, given it's Veterans Day today, I'm going to call up our chapter president, Charles Jones, for a few words. Please welcome Charles.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I just wanted to take a moment just to really honor the veterans and that are out there. That this is a day. I come from a military family, and that I know a lot of other people do, and the service that is provided by our military members, past and present, is really just such a great gift that's given to the whole country. I just wanted to take a moment to thank all the veterans that are here today and all the veterans that are listening in today. And if you have a moment today and you meet a veteran, be sure to thank them for their service. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. This and previous webinars are recorded and made available on the ACP website. Please feel free to share the link to the recordings with your peers and anyone you think might benefit from it. You'll receive a link to the recording after the webinar via email along with additional information on the topical content. Today's webinar is a live broadcast of the Connecticut Chapter's monthly program at Northeast Utilities headquarters in Berlin, Connecticut, just outside of Hartford. It's a very special program, and we're thrilled to make it available to such a large and diverse audience. For those of you out there, there's about 35 people here today, and they're quiet because they just had a big lunch. So now we're ready for the program. And at this time, I'd also like to thank our Connecticut Chapter Program Director, Debbie Sullivan, who arranged for these great speakers today. Thanks, Debbie. And we've got a great presentation coming up next. Jeff, you guys ready? Okay. Please join me in welcoming Steven Thal and Jeff Heisner.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you with our team. Let me introduce the team members. I'm Steven Thal. I chair the Capital Region Council of Emergency Planning Functional Needs Unit, and we've been in operation about 9-10 years. Let me introduce some of our members. On my left here, we have Dennis Mitchell. He's the emergency planner and overseer of that program for the state of Connecticut Department of Developmental Services. Dennis.
Hello.
And then we have Mary Ann Langton. She retired from the state of Connecticut, and she's also doing some emergency services with individuals and organizations in developing their goals. And with her today is her assistant, Debbie.
She's currently retired from the table for a moment or two. She'll be back.
And then, of course, you know Jeff. He's already been introduced, and as well as myself. One of the important things that we found, this is our 8th year in training first responders, EMTs, CERT teams, and others on the front line on how to respond to people and being prepared for persons with disabilities. The program today is going to be highlighted because of the short amount of time we can be with you. But we have trained now over 4,200 first responders and we're still getting calls because the need is great. We're the only team in Connecticut and one of the few teams in New England doing this. I forgot to introduce my new guide dog. I lost my other one in June, and this is Keenan. And he's a yellow lab, and he was born in Ontario, Canada. Okay, Dan, come on. What we would like to do is, as mentioned before, communication is very key with any of your employees, particularly those that have disabilities. The important thing today is we want you to look at each section as it's presented by our presenters and think of the following. One, I need to have more than one way of communicating with not only your staff, but especially with persons with disabilities. I need to understand how they communicate. What's the best way? The second thing is you need to involve them in planning, in your emergency plans. You need to invite them in, because by doing this, you can learn more about them and they can learn how they can help you. And thirdly, you need to get them involved in the exercise program. It is very key. This is what we found over all these years, some of the lessons we've been learning from the town and so on. The other thing to keep in mind, while many of the communication approaches may be similar, many of them are unique. So as we go through the different disabilities, please keep that in mind. And then relate it back to whether you have to make any kind of policy changes. One example I just want to give you, we were out at a CERT team, and we noticed one CERT team said, no exotic animals in our shelter. Another CERT team in another part of the state, oh, no problem, we'll take them in. So without further ado, let me have Dennis come up to continue our journey. Dennis?
Okay, we're notorious for jumping around during the slide presentation, so you jump around with us and good luck. First, let's frame the conversation a little bit. Who is a person with a disability? Where are we? Could you go to the next slide, please? No, yeah, there you go. Okay, we're just going to use, for purpose of discussion, we're going to use some of the ADA definitions. And people with disabilities, for our discussion today, are people that have some kind of a physical or mental impairment that affects one of their major life activities. What's a major life activity? Keep going. Okay, so you get it? Walking, seeing, breathing, that's what major life activity, a significant limitation in that area. Okay, could you go to the next slide, please? When the census comes around every 10 years or so, there's a portion of the census that's called the American Community Survey. You familiar with it at all? Now this, like the rest of the census, is pretty voluntary, and people can respond or not respond. Well, there's a section of that in the American Community Survey that asks people about their personal experience with disability. Do you have one or more disabilities in these particular areas? Huh? Okay, so the results from the Connecticut portion of that survey were that about 377,000 or so folks identified themselves as being people with one or more disabilities. Now that comes out to about, I think it's like 10.7 or something like that % of Connecticut's population. And on the national scene, it's about 12% of the population. Isn't that interesting? Who did not respond to that survey? My mother. My mother did not respond to that survey. My mother functionally has disabilities because she's older. And along with that has come decrease in her ability to see very clearly, and her mobility issues. And she could very easily have identified herself as being a person with a disability. But if you said that to my mother, she'd come upside your head and slap you, right? So for all those people who self-identified, 10% of the population, we believe that there's a fairly large part of the population who may be experiencing these limitations over the course of their life who do not self-identify, right? That's the basic idea between this. Go to the next slide, please. Okay.
So kind of the bottom line to the whole thing when we started talking about disabilities and emergency management and emergency preparation was that most people that we end up speaking to, they're not interested in doing a disability 101 kind of course kind of thing. They want to know quick information and they want to know it fairly succinctly. So for all intents and purposes then, the FEMA idea about functional needs in the event of an emergency is a very useful one, regardless of what your specific diagnosis is, which really doesn't give you a whole lot of information as a planner, does it? Right? Because there's all these nuances to it. The bottom line kind of is, do you have needs in those particular areas? In maintaining your independence, and being able to continue on with your communication, and being able to care for your transportation and your medical circumstances, etc. Or are you going to need extra support and assistance in the event of an emergency to do that? And when you think about it in that way, people with disabilities, if you think of the whole thing, people with functional needs as being a pie, people with disabilities are a slice of that. But you also have other folks in the population, like people with different cultural issues, people who speak or don't speak the predominant language in your company or your organization or your community, or people who have, my neighbor across the street had a messed up hip operation, right? So for all intents and needs, for the next several months, he is a person who has a functional need should an emergency occur. So that's kind of a time-limited thing. But there's all those kinds of people, all fitting in that big functional needs pie. But today, we're going to talk specifically about people with disabilities. Questions? Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Not be able to self-identify, but certainly would need help. Like, how did that survey get to those people who can't self-identify?
Well, if you didn't fill it out for them, then it didn't. It gets sent whoever the typical survey gets sent to as part of the census are the ones who would fill out. So you would fill it out for members in your household. But it depends, you know. Yeah. It just gives you an idea that there may be a whole lot. Yeah. So your brother, was it? So he wasn't considered in the numbers, right? No.
He goes to an address and they follow up, someone from that address does not respond.
Yeah, as Steve said initially, this idea of one-size-fits-all communication probably isn't the best way to go about finding information that you're going to need to help develop your plan. And if nothing else, this is an illustration of that.
I don't want to belabor the point, but the matter of fact is, in a lot of organizations that we dealt with across the various towns in Connecticut, we're finding that their CERTs, which is the community emergency response teams that assist the first responders, during a crisis, these people are going door to door and asking the various families and various address people that are in their domains if they have anybody that has a disability, and this is something brand new, believe us when I tell you this, because we've been hearing it only for about the past year, Dennis. The CERTs have been doing something like this. They're volunteering to go forward on it.
It depends on what each different search team,
right,
what they're inclined to do.
Exactly. So that just gives you some idea. A lot of what we're talking about, some of this, we're trying to give you the latest and the greatest.
Okay, I believe I'm done with my section here. I believe I'm done with my section.
Okay, the next section I'd like to talk about briefly is people who are deaf or hard of hearing. Important thing about understanding about people who are deaf are a couple things. One, you have to let them know that you're there, whether you tap them on the shoulder. Another way to do it is if you're coming into a room, you may flick the light off and on. You have to develop your own technique to developing with that particular employee. That's why we said earlier it's important to involve them in your emergency planning. The second thing to know is if you're going to communicate with them, talk in a normal voice. For some reason, and I never understood this, that they have to shout at you, and they can't hear you. But what they can do is a lot of them are taught how to lip read. Not 100%, but they're taught how to look at your lips. And the other most important thing that we tend to forget, they look at the expression on your face. Now, what would happen if you approached, say, if I were deaf, and we had to leave the building right away, and you're sitting there telling me, time, we got to go, and you're smiling. What kind of message are you sending me? Anybody? That's right. So you have to realize that whenever you're communicating, the expressions on your face are very critical for a number of persons with disabilities because they're looking at it. So keep that in mind. Get an interpreter. If it's an emergency, then you're going to have to use gestures, or you can work this out with the person and learn some of the sign languages. We've given you some numbers of where you can get interpreters to start practicing this. The other thing to keep in mind is that if somebody's doing gesturing or trying to sign, look at the lighting. The lighting has to be good. It can't be poor lighting. Now, there are some environmental concerns. Dennis, can you demonstrate visual? Is he doing it, visual noise?
I'm in the back. Yep.
He's in the back. Now, sometimes there will be people here trying to distract you, and you're looking over there. That's visual noise. So keep that in mind, because there are some environmental effects. It could be poor lighting. It could be no lighting. So those are just some of the major concerns for someone who's deaf. Now, there are some people who get cochlear implants. Cochlear implants and wearing hearing aids does not give you normal hearing. It helps to accentuate what you're hearing. So, for example, if there's a lot of background noise, what do you think is going to happen? Right, it's going to be very difficult. Down. It's going to be very difficult for someone like me or others to hear you. So you have to stand in front, or there is a device that I recently got that's in shape of a pen. This is a microphone that I can hand you, and you can speak into it, and it reduces some of the noises. Very interesting device of how technology can come together. The other thing in terms of...
Steven, what happens if there's an alarm going off? How does that impact the ability to communicate with a hearing impaired person?
The question was, what about if an alarm is going off? How does that impact a hearing impaired person? The ability to communicate.
Extremely difficult, because I end up shutting my hearing aid down because it just blows my ears out. It just magnifies it. You know, it's like if we were to take this microphone system today and turn it up to high pitch, or you go to a rock concert, that's what it sounds like. It's very, very difficult in terms of somebody with hearing aids. The other thing is, always try to stand in front of the person so they can see you or hear you better, because there's always a lot of distractions that are going around in terms of hearing aids. Another distraction, which many people may not know, women have high-pitched voices. And as we age, the high-frequency range is impacted first. So a lot of people don't know that. We've saved a lot of marriages in our training. I would say about 5. Okay, if there are no questions on that, I want to go into and talk about low vision. Low vision means somebody that has some usable vision. About 10% roughly about our population has no vision. But with low vision, you have some vision, some usable vision, and you use magnification or some other adaptive equipment. Now, if you know somebody has a visual impairment, what's the first thing you should do? Anybody? I can't see you, so you have to just yell it out. All right, the other thing is introduce yourself. Hi, I'm Cynthia, or whatever, because some people can't see your faces. Or some people may be embarrassed to say, you know, would you introduce yourself? Another important thing is when you go to a different room with the person, describe the room to them, because it's a whole new, different situation. I remember over the years, my wife used to change the furniture and not tell me. So when I went home, it was like an obstacle course, and fortunately with my guide dog, we were able to avoid some of the spills, especially flipping over the couch. Another thing in terms of vision, there are people that need to adjust from a brightly lit outside to coming inside or going the other way. So give them a few seconds. Also ask them if you need assistance. That's the critical piece. Too often people like to grab me, but I don't know why. I want to show you in closing the proper way to guide somebody who's blind. And I need to get a volunteer from the audience. Is Ed here available?
I'm here.
Okay. One of the things Ed just said over here, I may not know what over here is, so what's a better way to do it? Or the clock system. Okay, I'm going to do this with the guide dog. Now, Ed is going to ask me if I need assistance.
You need help?
Okay, that's fine. Or you may say, hi, I'm Ed Goldberg. I'm from NU. Can I help you?
I might say that.
That was your test. All right, now, when Keenan, I've only had Keenan about 40 days, but I would drop the harness. Keenan knows he's not to lead. I would fold the leash in half, and Ed would give me his left elbow. Oh, where is it? That's what you get for working out in the gym, huh? Okay, now turn to the right. And Ed would lead. He would be about a step or two ahead of me, and we would follow. See, there's no grabbing of the arms or anything, just following. He stops, and then he would say left, and then I would just bring the dog with me, and we would go. And we stop. If we come to stairs, Ed then has to tell me which way the stairs go, up or down. Why do you think that?
First step's a doozy.
That's true, Ed, that's true. But you use different body movements to go up and down. And also to let me know, make sure that we're both on the stairs before we go out. That's critical because I could still be on the landing. He could be on step 2, and guess who goes down the stairs? Me.
Right.
So that's what we recommend, and you can relax by folding your arm this way. Mm-hmm. Now, if it's a narrow passageway, Ed will put his hand in back of him like the cops are going to arrest you.
Wow, Ed, you know how to do that, huh?
So this says narrow passageway without even speaking, and I just follow Ed.
Single file.
Yeah, we just go single file. Any questions? Thank you, Ed. Any questions on low vision?
Just something to think about also. I just want to interject it. When we came in today, the hallway that you come down on, the one with all the nice glass on the side and stuff, you notice that those firelights that are in that hallway, how do they operate? Do you know? Are they straight lighting or are they strobe lighting? They're strobe lighting. So that's going to have an impact on a person who has low vision if that's an exit route for them out of this building. Because what you're going to have is you're going to have that visual noise, in essence, operating for that person. So you're going to see lights bouncing off the walls. And that may, instead of supporting their ability to evacuate effectively, may interrupt their ability to evacuate effectively.
Remember, people with low vision may be using some adaptive aids like a visual magnifier, adapting their computer, and so on. So that's it. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
People with physical mobility problems. A lot of people just see a wheelchair.
and say those are the physical disabilities. But there are a lot more. There's a lot more than that. We're talking about people with walkers, crutches, you name it. It could be their legs. It could be their arms or back or whatever it may be. So there's a large population. But in this category, it is more important to know about their functional disabilities. Whether they have a disability. If I tell you I have cerebral palsy, I bet most of you wouldn't know what that is. But if you know what my functional abilities are, that tells you a lot more. That tells you more, a lot more in a hurry. There is so much in each chapter, but Jeff But luckily, Jeff only gave me a couple minutes. At the beginning, I was only allowed 30 seconds. So 3 minutes is like, oh my God. Communication is the key. You need to communicate with the person. If they are unable to speak. You will need to figure out a way to communicate. Some quick ways are by nodding yes or no, or by their eyes, or some people can write notes. I can only draw you a pretty picture. Everyone loves to hand me a piece of paper and pen and write, what is it that I need? Communication is key. Also in my case, I know damn well what I'm going to need. I think. After the speakers, now I don't know. You were great. I would prefer for someone to ask me what I need instead of playing the guessing game. And I can cut down the time. And also when I work in the state. And luckily I was on the 3rd floor after Katrina. After Katrina, I figured I have to figure out my safety plan after Katrina. I asked a couple people near my office if they would be willing to be with me in case of an emergency. And it got to be the entire floor. That's all the time Jeff gave me. One more minute. My chair is my life. We're together all day. Without my chair, I will not be able to work. Will not be able to be on my computer. So where I go, my chair must go. Because it is my life. And if I go outside without my chair, where would you be putting me? On the grass? I don't think you would do that on a January day. Guess how much my chair weighs? Hurry up. Hurry up. Yeah. 400 pounds. But guess how much it costs? Did someone say 45,000? It costs $50,000. I've had this chair for 2 years. And I'm still getting fitted. So I can work it all the way. So you also have to think about the person's equipment. Thank you.
Marianne, I have one question for you. If you're being evacuated from an employment setting and there's rain, does that impact your chair at all? Oh my God, yeah. Life is fun. My control. He has to say. Can I get like, oh, it's so, I get inside you. So what I feel is I am good. So what I do is I have tape that I put on that just covers the chair. Oh, you could just defeat the fire. Or you can just get
Thank you.
I'm thinking
Now in lines of your plans, of your exercises, on how would you be able to, one, if you don't have somebody that's in a wheelchair like Marianne, and be aware there are different, and if you go on the internet, you could see all of them, okay, types of wheelchairs. There are ways in which you could just lock the chair, the motorized wheelchair, so you can push it, okay? But I would strongly suggest in your plans, looking for the wheelchairs, looking for the walkers, looking at these things to say, what is the trials and tribulations that are you going to encounter trying to use a line of mobility to transport them from where they work and what floor they work on and where they are located within the building to exiting that building. And what I would also suggest, and many of you may be doing it already, is the buddy system. Has anybody, are you doing the buddy system? Okay, so you're familiar what it is. That's something, don't just restrict it to 2 or 3 or 4. Get as many as you can, okay? I'm using this in a discussion I had with Marianne, okay? Like she said, she had the whole floor. Why? Because they know her, they liked her, and that's why. But there are organizations where people say, I don't want to be bothered, or what about this, what's my responsibilities? And in this case, the responsibility would probably fall under, and I would check it out, okay, as the Good Samaritan law, which would protect the person against any liability, personal liabilities, by, take example, moving Marianne. If you took her out of that chair and didn't know what you're doing, you would probably injure her back forever, okay? But at least you know where you are, put it in your plan step by step, and I mean, I've been there, done that. Then in your exercise, try other areas, things that you may have not thought about that may be very out of the box, we'll call it. So you can go ahead and have these people do that and work with somebody that has that mobility restriction, okay, and see how well you can do with it. And in cases, and I'll be very frank, with Marianne, when I first met her, my goal in life was I want to be able to understand her without her assistance. I've gotten there. I'm 90% there, but I'm not 100%. Don't be smart. She is bad. No, but seriously. So, but where Dennis has been working with her for a while, he can talk to her back and forth terrifically. So thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to bring this back to kind of what we end up doing typically when we meet with communities, first responders, et cetera, which is who this presentation primarily is geared towards. But one of the things that we find is that most of the plans that communities have developed have accounted for the for a certain type of person that represents their population. And what they don't consider are the degrees of differences that are, of people who are represented in their communities, people who may experience functional needs in the event of an emergency, whether that's people with disabilities, whether that's people with some kind of language barrier. So you get like a one plan fits all, but it's kind of milquetoasty in its nature, it doesn't consider a lot of the community. So what we end up saying at the end of a presentation, typically, if you now had to create a plan that would accommodate the needs of Mary Ann and Steven and some of the other presenters there, you do a bang-up job, right? But they don't work for you, or they don't live in your community. And you do have people who are working in your organization, living in your communities, and do you have a dialogue going along with them to help develop plans? So that means, as you can see, there's some real personal involvement that comes with this. And how do you draw that information out from your workforce? Do you have methodology for doing that? Do you have methodology for getting people involved? So on a bright sunny day, Mary Ann, in essence, doesn't have a functional need, right? She got in here. She's caring for that circumstance of her mobility kind of on her own. It's when things break down or impact on the adaptive, assistive, supportive devices that some people use. When they impact on that, that's when a need is represented in the event. So that's what we encourage people to think about and talk about with the people in their community at their work sites. Yes.
Are there any privacy concerns or HR issues, HIPAA perhaps? Like obviously we can't require people to divulge this information, but can you speak to that element at all?
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer and I don't play one on TV. But I will tell you that my understanding of the ADA law is that when a person is hired, you can have a discussion about that individual as to what their needs might be in the event of an emergency. But communication is key, right? So do you have several ways of communicating with people to get that kind of information across? Who's going to be open to that? Do you work that? Yeah.
Well, I was going to say the EEOC has that exact paragraph statement, which is once you're a hired employee, and the question is not that you ask them what is wrong, the question is you ask them what do you need. But what I've experienced is that there are people who are functionally able to get by, but like you said, they have a clear disability. In my experience, it was someone who had an amputee on one leg. He had a cane to get around, but I thought if he's going, and he didn't want assistance. He said he did not need assistance, but on the other side, the facility planners were aware of him, knowing that in an emergency, people rushing out, going down the stairwell, he might need assistance, and had sort of extra support around.
And just keep in mind there's people that choose not to disclose their disability, and that's their right not to do so, but that creates other issues. Just another topic for another day.
People with disabilities are more willing to talk to people and create a plan. I know. I've created my own plan at work. Because the upper management could care less. I just hope they saw what I did and could follow through.
I think one of the assistants to be able to gather information is the approach that you adopt too, right? Like I gave the story of my mother. You think I'm kidding? My mother, seriously. But my mother would respond to, hey, Ma, if there was a fire in the house and we had to go down the stairs, do you want me to go down first or or do you want, how do we do that, Mom? I don't have to talk about a disability. It's not the issue. That's why the FEMA definition is very useful, yes? It's not talking about the disability. It's talking about the need. What is the need for that individual should a certain circumstance arise? And I would think that if you have a kind of a relationship with your employees that you probably should have, that kind of a discussion can occur in that context. People are then working with you. This whole cited guide technique, why not just grab Steve by the arm? Because if I go over and I grab you by the arm, what's your response? Yeah, see? He's either going to hit me or he's going to pull his arm away. You know what I mean? So when you have that kind of a communication structure, you have opposing forces working against each other in an event where it would really be best to be working together. That's the cited guide technique, right? So you can use the skills that Steven has, you can use your knowledge of the appropriate evacuation route, and you can work together. It's the same thing when you're addressing how do I modify my plan to incorporate people. If you work together and that attitude is portrayed, then people will cut you a lot of slack for being ignorant about the particular needs. And you can enter into a dialogue situation. And it's the dialogue that we've always encouraged, whether it occurs in communities, whether it occurs with first responders reaching out to their community to understand what's going on. First, a firefighter will tell you the worst thing that they were able to do is have to make a cold call, not knowing who's in that house and what they might be required to do. Well, that means you kind of, as best you can, you'd like to find out ahead of time and adjust your plans accordingly, right? Okay, so I'm going to move on to people with intellectual disabilities. Let it sit there for a second. How many people have driven down the highway and have used the restrooms on the highway? Very good. Okay. Do those restrooms look like the bathrooms in your house? No. Then how do you know how to use them? Huh? How do you know how to use them? They don't look like the bathroom in your house.
General theme?
General theme. Okay. Okay, so hold that now. Hold that comment now. People with intellectual disabilities typically have issues with reasoning, learning, and problem solving across an array of those daily life activities. Right? So people with intellectual disabilities may have a problem in taking the skills and experiences about bathrooms that I've learned from the rest of my life, taking that information, applying it to this new highway bathroom, and being able to figure it out. They're going to have some issues with being able to do that, either at all or in some kind of a timely fashion. Kind of simple, right? Okay. So that's a kind of a rough definition that we're going to use with that. Reasoning, learning, and problem solving. This is going to create some issues for your emergency planning. Next slide, please. Okay. Well, we'll come back to that. Reasoning, learning, and problem solving. One of the things that we did, I worked with the Department of Developmental Services, and we have fire evacuation plans for all our places, right? All looks great on paper and stuff, you know, it's very good. What we found is that during drills, what we ended up doing was one of the teaching techniques in the drill was to place some obstacle in front of a particular doorway, you know, and that would be the fire. And so that when people saw that obstacle, they would go to the other doorway. And what ended up happening was that over time, when that same routine was practiced over and over, people always went to that other doorway. And we found that when we removed that article and put it into the other doorway, that there was a bottleneck there. Reasoning, learning, problem solving. Now, I could tell you from my 30-so years of experience in working with people with intellectual disabilities, people are taught new tasks, new circumstances by repetition, rote, over and over and over again. They may start from the back of the task and work forward. They may start from the front of the task and work backward, but they do the same thing over and over and over again. so that people with intellectual disabilities rely heavily on routine, very heavily on routine. Make sense? Okay. What is an emergency? It's a screw-up of my routine. And when your routine gets screwed up, what can you expect as a response? The range of stuff that you talked about earlier in your other presentation, the range of interactions, all of which you can expect to see with people with intellectual disabilities. This presents great problems for developing business continuity plans that try to incorporate this idea of reasoning and problem solving for each of the workers that operate in your office. You should know how to go this way. You should know how to go that way. But the key in there is the routine. So for a person with intellectual disabilities, as opposed to the continuous hotly worded memos that might come out, or the constant referral to the website to look at the plans that are on there, or viewing the video over and over, what might be another way to work to ensure that people have some kind of understanding of your emergency response plan? Over and over and over, right? Yeah. Would you be surprised to know that not all organizations rely all that heavily on drills? Because they require some work, and they require they require time. But even if you were able to segment out groups to be able to run through the drills with them, that might be useful. Because I don't know exactly how to go about doing it, but I do know how people have learned new skills and are constantly being taught new skills who are people with intellectual disabilities. And I've just told you. So you may as well piggyback on that and work with that, right? Any questions about people with intellectual disabilities? No, autism is a whole different, well, it's not a whole different thing, but it's a different circumstance. Where the notion that the flashing lights sends me information that something is wrong in my environment and I need to attend to my safety and well-being may not be the message that's sent to a person with an intellectual disability or to a person with autism. It may mean that I need to hide from that information. That means I might need, when we talk with CERT teams, we say, your pattern of search, which might be a perimeter search, hello, is there anybody in there, might not be sufficient if a person has an intellectual disability or if a person has autism, because they're not apt to say, yo, right here, help me out, will you? Because they may be hiding away from that stimuli. I mean, sometimes I do that myself, you know. The boss is like, so you do that, yeah.
You have a plan, right? I mean, we think about, most of us in this room are thinking about corporations and individuals with intellectual disability, and I work for a corporation as well, but I also take it down to the personal level. Yes. First respondents, okay? As I pointed out, I do have a severely handicapped brother who does live with me. He's 42 and has an intellectual capability of a 2-year-old. If something happened in an emergency, hypothetical scenario, that there was a fire and I became unconscious and they did a perimeter search, he wouldn't be able to respond, right? So, that's where, getting in with the communities and making sure that the first respondents really know where different households have this need. Not asking, what is this disability? How can I help you? And I can tell you, and I don't want to divulge the town that I live in, that no one has approached me in that manner. So, it's interesting. So, not only should we be thinking at the corporate level, but, how we can facilitate improvements at the community level as well.
One step further, all right? Think about how long would it take a first responder, police, or fire department to reach your facility? 15 minutes, 20 minutes, how long? Give me a number. Okay? Now, what do you do in that time? You're depending on your fire marshal to take the place of that first responder. If they don't have that knowledge, and you have not transferred that knowledge or transferred the knowledge that we're trying to help you gain, now what? You now have statistics. So the point that we're attempting to influence and bring everybody in this room and also on the webinar is basically train the trainer. You're taking up that gap of that 20 minutes to a half hour before your first responder is there to be able to, whether it be a evacuation or a shelter in place, but you want to help that person to be able to fend for themselves or to, with assistance of a buddy, using the buddy team, for them to also get to safety at some place. Don't count on your first responder, your police department, to be there. I learned that when I was with NASDAQ. We were the highest profile company in there. That the agreement was made that they will get their ASAP. Trouble as a volunteer fire department. ASAP converted to 22 minutes.
But
What we're trying to accomplish is that your people, your plans, your exercises include exactly how do I deal with a situation that a first responder is not there until they get there. Bottom line.
you're going to get, obviously you're going to get some overall ideas, some generalizations, but the real message that we want to send is a message that might address the needs of your brother in your circumstances. That there may be somebody who has some pretty intimate knowledge about an individual that can make the whole process that much easier for both the people who are responding and for the individual who is undergoing this emergency situation. But some kind of dialogue needs to occur. Some kind of a communication needs to occur. And that communication needs to play out in adjustments and modifications to plans. Now, oh my God, how do you do that at a corporate level? You have to know who your employees are. You have to know who your employees are. That's the deal. Sorry. And if you have a large corporation, then you got a lot of people to know. What can I tell you? If you want to take that notion that a person's functional needs, that's what I'm shooting to be able to address in the event of an emergency. So if you have plans that you develop in your office and you haven't had some discussions with others in your company about what kinds of individuals your plans are affecting, then your plans suck. Sorry to say it.
So my point is that as a large corporation, you have to find that right person. I agree. You need to know your employees. And I will not tell you, I had a very interesting story when I first started at the company I work for, which I don't want to say right now. And it happened to be with a person that was a quadriplegic in a wheelchair, and we had a significant event. And guess what? Everybody looked around and said, well, what do we do? It turned out I ended up bringing this person in an elevator, down an elevator during a fire drill. And I said to myself, are you kidding me? First thing I did was I went back and said, you got something wrong with your plan here. You need to fix this. But the point is you need to feel comfortable. I mean, each one of us here, are here today, representing our corporations, but, you can also be advocates in your community as well. If you know your neighbor has a disability, you might approach them and ask them, do you have an exit strategy? I mean, I learned something today from this gentleman here, which was that, hey, look at, don't count on your first responders. Maybe it means I need to go to my neighbor and say, hey, if you ever see flames coming out of my roof, you got come over and get my brother, But my point is, you can be an advocate for your company, but also be an advocate for your community as well. So I think I've learned a lot.
Okay, I'm going to cover service animals very quickly. More and more people are getting service animals for a number of things. A couple years ago, the Americans with Disabilities Act had to change the definition to any dog that performs a specific task or function for the person with a disability, because people were bringing in snakes, boa constrictors, all those kind of things. I don't know how everybody would feel if one walked into your place and there was he was hired or she was hired, and you're sitting there, and how are you going to communicate with this person? Now, in terms of the different types of service animals, the basic ones are these: alerting. The alerting can be with people with who are deaf or severe hard of hearing. The other one is for people that have seizure disorders that are not well controlled. Another one is for people with physical disabilities like Mary Ann. They may pull a wheelchair that's not powered, and they may also do a lot of retrieving. Now, in each of these cases, the dogs are trained to fit the person's needs. They can be individualized. Another big category, of course, is the blind. We're also finding that because of the military, we're finding dogs are being used for post-traumatic syndrome. They're being used for psychiatric conditions and so on. The list is endless. The basic thing is don't pet the dogs because they are performing. Sometimes some of us will have the dog sit and then you can pet the dog, or if they're out of harness or not using a cape. Train? So that's it very quickly. There are emergency procedures to use that I can explain later to you because we're running out of time. But that's generally about the service animals. You don't pet, they can go anywhere the public goes. So that's just a quick overview of service animals. Jeff?
Yeah. I apologize for cutting down. Oh, sorry, it turned on. I think my side all over the floor. I apologize for cutting into the time here and really trying to stay on schedule. That's my fault. But basically, what I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to kind of briefly talk about some of the other things, but most of you can read, but this area I think is very important. We're all familiar with risk management. We know the risk assessment process, the impact to the business, things like that. To me, what is more important, are you familiar with your staff? Do you know who are the people that have functional needs, and are you on top of it? Are you familiar with those that have a disability and what disabilities that they have? Okay, and able. And why did I lead in with the functional? Because a lady can be expecting, you're fine, you know her, she's great, hey, terrific. All of a sudden there's a fire drill, and guess what? Those 5 steps she has to go down is might as well put her on a roof and push her off it because it's just physically difficult for her to go down those steps. And that's something that changes. That person, 10 months earlier, had no problem running down those steps. She used to go out jogging, okay? But in that 8th month, 9th month, it ain't the case. So you should be aware of those types of situations that could be there, okay? Be aware of the people's needs, okay? Be aware of some of the issues that you could come into with the difficulty that we've already discussed, the hearing, the vision, okay? How do I go ahead and address these types of problems in my plans? How do I convince management that, hey, we need some signage here that identifies that this is the way out because white and pink just don't make it, okay? We're getting a black and white will. Even a blue and white now may not be. And be aware of those people. What happens when those strobe lights go off during an alarm? What's going to happen? I asked Mary Ann, are you independent? Absolutely, she told me. Guess what? She told me something else that I almost fell off my chair. I'm good until you start an alarm system. I freeze. I have no control over that whatsoever. As soon as those alarms go off, I'm dead meat. It has to be in the plan. The person, when you talk to them, what do you need? Question them. Find out. Put yourself. The best way I can say it in one word is empathy. Okay? Put yourself in their shoes. You know they have issues. What kind of issues do you think they have? Ask them. Don't be afraid. That's how I've gotten to know Mary Ann. Okay? That's how I've gotten to know Steve and getting my chops broken. And same with Mary Ann. Okay? People feel comfortable. If you talk to them on your playing field and treat them with respect, okay, you won't get any pushback. It's when you start looking at them as, oh, well, you have a disability. Gosh darn it. I'm so sorry you have a disability. If I did that to Mary Ann, she'd give me a what for? You know? Seriously. She's a tough woman. So the bottom line is, treat them as an equal. Talk to them as an equal. These are the things that are going to make it. Okay? It's fun. I'm just going to try to push a little bit.
Let's do this, Jeff. I'm thinking that we're not going to do it justice because we've got people that are leaving and we've got a national audience. They'll start dropping off. We should come back to this. I mean, we're not done. This is a great topic. There's a lot of interest. This is an engaging topic, and the room's available after we're done here. But in deference to the national audience, I'm gonna close it up for now, and then we'll promise to do another session where we do the rest of the material because it's really engaging. We don't want to lose out on this. So with that, I have to just a little message for the folks at home. Before you leave, stick around for 30 seconds. I can give you some quick information. First, I want to thank our presenters, Cynthia, Steve, Steven, Jeff, Marianne, Dennis. Thank you so much. Great job, and we'll have to extend on this in the near future. Thank you. Thanks again to ADG and ACP support staff up in Albany, and Fred Rogers down in Houston, and Continuity Housing for sponsoring the entire ACP webinar series. Remember to visit their site. Leave a comment on the survey if you're interested in how they can help you. Be sure to watch the ACP website for future webinar information. I think we have another one next week, another webinar with, I believe it's with BCI. And as a reminder, this and the other previous webinars are recorded and made available on the ACP website. Share the link to the recordings as you deem appropriate. Anyone that you think might benefit from it is welcome to see it. You'll receive a link to the recording after the webinar, along with an email with additional information on topical content. And you'll get a brief survey that'll pop up when you close your browser. Take half a minute to answer the questions because it really does help us refine our productions for you. Thanks and have a great day.